I'm Brian Runciman, the Managing Editor of the BCS. We're discussing today in our debate making IT projects work. In fact, looking at project success overall. We certainly don't need any more facts and figures about project failure. We see them all too often in the press about public sector projects and in the IT press specifically about IT projects. But what can we do to overcome the problems that we face? In today's debate, we're going to look at some of the problems. We're going to look at some possible solutions to them. And to do that, we have a selection of CEOs to talk to. So around the table we have David Hicks from Radtech, Melanie Franklin from Maven Training, and Paul Major from Program Framework. So I'd like to direct the first question, if I can, to you, Dave. In the long history of project management, and perhaps it started at Noah, I'm not too sure, why do so many seem to fail?
I think the underlying problem is one that's probably more important, more serious now than it's ever been, and that's the ability to be able to respond to changing circumstances within a project. All too often we seem to set off on projects with a view that we must understand right at the beginning exactly what we're going to deliver and have a detailed understanding of what the solution is right at the beginning. And quite frankly, I think that's impossible. Organisations need to focus more on being able to respond to changing circumstances, being able to respond to what they learn as they go through the project process so that they can become adaptive. The most successful organisations aren't ones that focus on trying to predict the future, because quite frankly that's impossible. The most successful projects and the most successful organisations are the ones that get good at responding to change.
Okay, now before we get on to the sort of nitty-gritty of what we're going to discuss here, I just wondered if there's also a perception issue. Perhaps I can ask you that, Melanie. Is it just a perception that all these projects are failing because of the way things are portrayed in the media, or is there a genuine problem? Let's start there.
I think, picking up on what Dave said, I think it's absolutely true that the perception of failure comes back to the original requirements were not delivered. But if the original requirements were gathered 6 months, 12 months ago, and the world has shifted quite considerably since then, we don't want those original requirements. What we need to ensure is that we're getting across our message that we've delivered what's needed for the new requirements. So for me, successful projects are all related to effective change control. But I think getting out the message that what we originally asked for was exploratory, we have analysed, we have innovated since then, and we've got something that is working. As long as it's fit for purpose when we deliver it, that's the success. And I think if you always compare a project back to its original requirements, its original mandate, then that is always going to look like, well, that's not quite right, that's not what we originally asked for.
And what about the relationship between programme and project management? We make a differentiation there, don't we, Paul? Is there really one?
I think there's probably a difference in the way that you approach them. Probably the difference is about scale and complexity and what you're trying to get out of them. I think the challenge with projects is that we have traditional definitions around projects that might be related to something that has a start and a finish and a defined deliverable and all of that sort of stuff. But fundamentally for me, a project is an approach to managing change. Actually, the common language, and we've used it already in this session, has been change. And I think sometimes we get tied up with project management language, and it almost becomes a barrier to people deploying projects successfully because it becomes a language barrier. If we think about projects or programs as an approach to successfully delivering the change that's required in our organization, then I think it would simplify the conversation.
Yes.
I really like the fact that with programme management growing in interest at the moment, people are starting to think about managing not just the project life cycle, but the change life cycle, if you like, the transition activities, and stop this situation where you've got projects where they deliver and they almost butt up against the operational environment they're delivering to. They throw something over the wall and say, hey, implement that now. I've created it. You know, I researched it, I've developed it, and now it's ready for you. I've tested it. Instead, I want to see those come together, because I think that's the effective change, and that certainly has a very strong link to project success, because I do feel that the people who receive the output from projects can be extremely negative when they're given something. It may very well work brilliantly, but they're the ones that have got to implement it. They don't know where to get started. They don't know how to do the adaptation of their processes or procedures, and they're left all alone because the project's all packed up and gone home, because that's what they were paid for and now they've done it. Whereas programme management, bringing those two, effectively those two life cycles together, makes me very happy, because I think the emphasis is starting to shift. There's a lot more conversation about change management now. How are we going to manage the changes that those projects are delivering? It's unfortunately, it's still a very low level conversation. It's not always sort of permeated throughout the organisation, but it's on the table now, and it wasn't 2 years ago.
So I asked that question about program and project management because in the past we've used the phrase IT project, which automatically seems to make it sound smaller, doesn't it? But of course, if it's a business change project, is it still a project, or is in fact are everything almost programs now because of the level of detail that we need to go into that makes something really change a business?
Well, for me, there's 2 or 3 things that characterise a programme rather than a project. One is simply a question of scale. A lot of organisations will call large projects programmes because it's a big thing. So that's definitely one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is that programmes typically address a number of different lines through a business. So rather than just focusing on IT, they'll encompass, people, process, technology, the full gamut, affecting an overall change. So that's another aspect. The third aspect that I think is increasingly important is that programs and program managers generally are used to dealing with uncertainty. Rather than focusing on a specific deliverable and a specific outcome in the way that a project and a project manager might, a program manager is more about thinking about a strategic outcome, delivering a vision, but exactly what that vision is going to be come the end and how we're going to get there is something that's mutable and changeable. That mindset, I think, is becoming more important down at the project level as well.
Right.
Yeah, I think if you have the mindset, I've got a start date, an end date, and I'm going to run my project exactly according to the structure, then that way disaster lies, particularly now when the fast pace of change. So I think this dealing with ambiguity, I think, is one of the phrases in one of the many textbooks, and what that really means.
Yes.
Very hard to define, but I was dealing with a manager recently, a chief executive, in fact, who unfortunately sort of, when they come up against a problem, their answer to it is just to shout louder and say, fix it, fix it, fix it. Whereas I think with really successful program managers, strategically, they come up against something that's just not going to work for the organisation or the market they're delivering to, and their way of dealing with ambiguity is to work around it, work under it, go over it, go around the side of it, look for ways to more creatively say, you know what, I'm happy to dump that part of the scope. I'm happy not to deliver those projects because actually we only need some more of this stuff and we need to add in something over here. It's that preparedness to move things around in the program plan and to add in projects, but to get rid of a lot of unnecessary stuff as the world changes, that I think is really important right now.
Right, now that's interesting because I think the point that Dave was making about the attitude of being more flexible trickling down to project managers, not just program managers, doesn't it also need to go to the other direction? Because how do you manage board level expectations? Because they're often oriented around let's do it by then and this is what needs to be done, aren't they?
Yeah.
And I think there's some real challenges in here, and it's almost the original terminology of an IT project and actually challenging whether there is such a thing. Because in reality, particularly when you escalate to program level, you are talking about business outcomes. You are talking about changes I want to make to my organisation. Whether those changes are enabled by some underlying technology, facilitated, supported by it, is almost irrelevant. And I think the challenge then becomes one of understanding actually what are the business drivers behind what I'm doing. And actually, when you talk to the board level, when you talk to the executive sponsorship, how are those business drivers really realised and understood by my executive leadership? Because frankly, you can have an army of project managers working away, beavering away, doing wonderful activities and wonderful work, but if it's not related, sponsored, understood, and fundamentally driving a business objective, a business outcome, then actually it's not achieving anything valuable for the organisation. And I think you're traditionally, and part of the challenge around becoming so focused on project management as a language is we kind of almost intrinsically disconnect it from business management as a language, and we end up with little islands of activity going on down here that actually don't deliver to what the business is trying to achieve.
I think IT projects is an unhelpful term because I think what it does is it pushes those projects back into the world of IT again. I would say that in the last 7 years of training project and program managers, the world has really shifted from I would have said about 80% of our delegates before were from the IT, I've got to learn how to do project world. But now we're seeing people from marketing, from finance, from operations, from audit, all the business functions, because actually projects have that terminology and that structure of how to get things done, how to make a change happen, has spread right across the business. So if we continue to use just this terminology about IT projects, I think it's very limiting, because it negates the fact that, you know, that's a small island of activity, because you're right, it's the embedding of the system, it's the redevelopment of the processes that system is actually going to contribute to, it's the benefits of the cost effectiveness of this new piece of technology. So to call something an IT project is, you know, it's very isolating, because often that's only one small piece of work compared to what else is going on.
It's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, isn't it? Because every project has an element of IT, almost by definition today. It must be an IT
Exactly.
project.
Yeah.